I've missed these faces. It's been 6 years since we've all been together, and we couldn't be more excited about this. It's been 10 years since we started this incident response forum, and the practice area has grown by leaps and bounds. And Bruce does these SEC enforcement forums also, and you go to these SEC and everybody's kind of glum and worried and anxious. Here, people are optimistic, fired up, and ready to go because this practice area is booming and is just filled with so much opportunity. So let's get going right away. As usual, we're starting off with our all-stars who are doing the state of play, just to sort of let you know about anything, and this will touch upon a lot of the different things that go on during the day. So let's get right to it. Starting off, I'm going to just tell you some quick things. What you know about Chris Cwalina from Norton Rose, the global co-head of Norton Rose Fulbright's Data Protection, Privacy, and Cybersecurity Group. We all know his credentials. They're unbelievable. He's been in this probably with us for 10 years now. What you might not know is he started out at Choice Point, ran their privacy, compliance, ethics, and credentialing department. He was also a DAO at Mayor. He's a coach, he's a counselor, he's an advocate, he's a fighter. So get ready, because he's also the John Wick of incident response. Awesome. All 4 chapters, I would say, for Cwalina. Next up, Jennifer Archie, a partner with Latham and Watkins, another person who's been here since, I think, the very first time we did this. If it involves tech, then Jennifer is on it. She's the editor of their global privacy and security compliance law blog. That's the amazing thing about the speakers today. Most of them are incredibly prolific in what they write. She's got 35 years of thought leadership and a track record in this space. She is a true pioneer. She did IR before IR was IR, and that's what I find amazing. She's the grand dame of incident response. She's Danica Patrick meets Ann and Nancy Wilson. That's what I put together for Jennifer Archie. Next up, Jen Coughlin. We have 2 Jens on this panel, a couple Jens all day. There's another Jen also, a partner and the founder of Mullen Coughlin. That's the amazing thing about these IR lawyers. Some of them are entrepreneurial, some of them are former law enforcement, some of them are former privacy lawyers. They come from all different spaces. Some of them are former litigators. But Jen is a real entrepreneur. Her law firm, Mullen Coughlin, is now a powerhouse of 115 attorneys. It's expanding overseas and just keeps growing and growing. You might not know that really she navigates the juxtaposition of law, business, technology, and entrepreneurship. I think that she's not just a trusted advisor, but Jen is always someone that I think of as an inspiration for someone who wants to do something, wants to build something. You come out of law school and you're thinking, I want to do something more than just the standard track. I always think about Jennifer. She's the Diana Prince of incident response, the ultimate badass, as anyone would say in this space, and definitely your go-to. Okay, next, Ben Demonte, the COO of Cybereason. This is their theme is this future-ready attack protection, ending cyber attacks at the endpoint, in the cloud, across the entire enterprise, and using AI in that context. So really on the cutting edge. 21 years, a lot of people today you'll hear from are former DOJ or FBI agents, and he did forensic analysis, handled hundreds of forensic projects every year. His claim to fame is that he reduced the backlog for service in the FBI agent, in the group that he did, from 90 days to less than 15 days. So what I would say about Ben, he's the high-tech mine hunter. He's the Holden Ford of incident response. Very excited to have Ben here. Welcome, Ben. Next up, Kim Peretti, okay, of Alston and Bird. She's the co-leader of their privacy, cyber, and data that you probably already know. 20 years data security expert. I first met Kim maybe 20 or 25 years ago when she was at the CSIPs, which is the computer crime and intellectual property section at DOJ, and you'll see a lot of alumni from that group who will be speaking today. She's really another sort of OG, a true pioneer in this space. She's on the faculty everywhere, even Secret Service, Cyber Investigation Advisory Board member. She, I think, holds the record for the most cyber blog posts. If you want to know what happened this morning, she's already written about it. And that's the fun part. So think about that computer crime and intellectual property section, because you'll see a bunch of alumni from them today. And I think Kim, again, she's a pioneer. She's Mia Hamm meets Rhonda Russi of IR. So real excited to have this panel. Chris, take it away.
Great, thanks so much. Great being here. Great being here with such a distinguished panel, folks that I've known for so long as most of the people. That's why I love this conference. Like the people that are in this space, as big as cyber security and incident response is getting and has grown. There's still a core group of people that have been doing this for so long. But plenty of opportunity. I think, when you were talking about, we're all optimistic in this group. I guess that's because, things seem to be getting worse. And so that's better for everybody who does this for a living. Lots of opportunity for new people in the space, as well as the people who have been doing it for a long time. So here, we're here to give a state of play. Just, we're going to talk about a couple questions. My job is to ask simple questions that we've pre-prepared answers for, so and rehearsed everything we're going to say. No, that's not what we're going to do. I'm going to toss out some topics and let these guys do the talking. Also, if anybody has a question that you want anybody on this panel to answer, please just raise your hand, and I'll be looking out for that, and we'll call on folks. So we do want this to be conversational, have nothing to present, just topics to discuss. So if anything's on your mind, just raise your hand. So we'll start with the threat actor landscape. And what we've been seeing, it seems like every year, this year was no exception. Last year, I remember saying the same thing during this session. You see a lot of pieces or articles about how things seem to be slowing down and the bad guys aren't as prolific anymore. And then you ask the people in this room and on the panel, and you say, well, that just doesn't seem right, because we're all so busy. So let's start with Ben, what you're seeing in this space in terms of, let's start with, we'll break it down between financially motivated groups and the APT, starting with the financially motivated guys. What are you seeing?
Nothing's changed. Same as it was 10 years ago when we started coming to the IR forum. So we have seen some changes, right? The BEC kind of investigations folks trying to get in the middle of transactions, the financially motivated folks, that seems to not have changed. We have seen a couple of changes in the tactics, right? They're with the use of AI-generated phishing emails, also some things that have changed sort of in the Microsoft product has kind of changed that. And then ransomware has been all over the place. Contrary to maybe some articles that have stated that ransomware is on the downturn, I don't think that's the case. We're seeing more and more of it. I think people equate
encryption. You still seeing encryption?
Yeah, I think that's what's happening is people equate the number of encryptions versus the actual numbers of what I would call like an intrusion, the ransomware intrusion. So we've seen encryption kind of changed, right? Not every time a ransomware group will encrypt. A lot of times they will just do the data exfiltration and extortion. And so that has kind of changed the landscape a little bit.
Jennifer.
So I think it hasn't slowed down, and I think it just looks different. So it has changed over the past few years, but it just looks different because threat actors have evolved their tactics. We're seeing, like Ben said, less encryption, but the threat actors are still there. What we're seeing now is they're jumping from group to group. They're not delivering on the promises you pay for, i.e. data suppression all the time. Sometimes their tactics are, we were talking earlier, you used to have a playbook. You would get a ransomware matter and you'd say, this is the threat actor, this is the average demand, this is the average payment, this is how they got into your system, this is what they're going to do to try and put pressure on you to pay. And it's a completely different ballgame now. You don't have that confidence level of knowing who you're dealing with day one like you used to have a few years ago.
And how's that changed your advice that you're giving clients now?
It's hard. It's unpredictable. We've had some matters recently. It's Luna Moth. They didn't encrypt. They just exfiltrated data. My clients paid for suppression, which we tell our clients all the time. You're paying for the promise of deletion made by a threat actor. You're paying a criminal to say, hand to God, I'm going to delete it. I'm not going to do anything about it. But you think about it, they've already been able to monetize the effort day one, incident one. They know there's value to that data. So why would they delete it? Because there's a reputation and they have to have an honor amongst thieves. But the data obviously has some monetary value. Maybe they won't use it. Maybe they'll share it with one of their threat actor group friends who will then weaponize it in some other way. So when we're counseling our clients, it is always, we have intelligence. We have access to experts that will give us additional intelligence to say, this is what may happen here. there's no predicting. And we can go back years and say, wait, this incident with this threat actor group, this is how they behaved then, this is how they behave now. So it's making sure our clients understand there's really no guarantee when you are dealing with the threat actors to how they're going to behave, if they're going to deliver on their promises, and you have to be ready to react to tactics that they may have not employed years prior.
Kim, how about you? What are you saying?
I would agree 100% with what Jennifer said in terms of it's less predictable, and that makes it more challenging for us, right? Because what we did have before is the intelligence of a few groups who knew what they were going to do. We could be able to advise with respect to that. We had the lockbit, the black cat, law enforcement interruptions, disruptions last year. That's really changed the field. It's still ransomware as a service. There's new affiliates. You don't know exactly what affiliate you're dealing with sometime, and they can be working with groups. They compete with one another. We're seeing a little bit from our clients of, I would say, ransomware fatigue, that this is the second or the third time that it's happened, and they're like, we're just not going to deal with it like we did before. And so we're seeing occasionally not even reaching out to the threat actor. And even though some of the systems have been encrypted with encryption, they're not as successful because the EDR tools are stopping and blocking more of the encryption, but they're still getting some systems encrypted, and then the client's like, well, let's just take our chance and not reach out and see what happens. I think that's very encouraging. And then we're also seeing more clients not pay, not engage in that way. So that's very encouraging. As long as we're talking about the threat landscape, let's just pivot over as well, because what I think we all need to be thinking about all things China. Many of us were probably here 10 years ago, right, when we saw the first indictment of Chinese threat actors from the Mandian investigation and the People's Liberation Army. And what we've seen from these typhoons, which are getting a lot of and should be getting a lot of attention, the Salt Typhoon, the Flax Typhoon, the Volt Typhoon, changing motives, disruption. Let's plant things in the U.S. systems, and in the event we want to exploit that at a later date. But if you think about Salt Typhoon and the publicity it got as one of the worst hacks in our history, we've seen a shift in China from a resource standpoint from the People's Liberation Army to the Ministry of State Security, where they have a lot more resources, a lot higher trained capabilities. That's pretty scary. So I think all things, if we think about the threat landscape, I would put China at the top.
I'm going to come back to APTs in a second. Jennifer, what are you seeing in terms of the financially motivated guys? Same as the.
I think it's well summarized. I guess I'd pivot to the what do you do then is just having the same really strong process of convening the right people to give you just in time information so that the best facts are getting into the decision making group. And I think in so many cases, paying, not paying, it's not the end of the world. Like it's how you manage either decision that you make, and the decision in the moment could be the right decision. So I'd say I'm just going to be saying this a lot today, but a strong process will always serve you well, which is convening the right people, having the right checklists, and not having any empty chairs in the room in terms of what the feedback would be is really all you can do, because next year it'll be another iteration, and there isn't one insight to share. There's just the main insight of how do you make good decisions.
Yeah, and the intelligence is constantly changing.
Right.
So I don't want people to walk away with me thinking that I said like the intelligence is unreliable because they're unpredictable. It matters, and we're able to say it's unpredictable because of the intelligence we have. So like Jennifer said, bringing the right people to the table with that intelligence to have those as educated as possible decisions and informed decisions made are key, even though we're dealing with a cyber threat landscape of complete unpredictability at this point.
One of the things I say a lot is, and I'm going to say again, is I think, there's some, it's hard to speak in this space with certainty and generalities, but I do anyway. And one of those is that companies should be able to stop the financially motivated guys. By and large, companies should be able to prevent the vast majority of the financially motivated guys. And I know there's also some overlap with when I say financially motivated. I'm talking about the e-crime guys, the data theft extortion guys, the encryption guys. And why I say that is because they're not all that sophisticated with their methods. People like to say there's sophistication, but it's not. It's actually not. These guys are far from sophisticated actors by and large. In terms of tactics, Ben, one of the things that we're seeing in our practice is sort of, we're not really seeing a lot of custom malware, a lot of malware being used. We're seeing remote management. We're seeing tell us what you're seeing with these financially motivated guys. How are they getting in? And why has it been so challenging for companies to stop this use of remote management? We call it RMM. Why don't you explain what RMM is? For most people in this room, I know, but why don't you talk about that for a minute?
So that's a big question, because we were just talking about edge devices versus, what really EDR technology has done for the endpoint. I'm going to say 25 years ago, it was always about the edge, right? Build higher fences and nobody will be able to jump the fence. And then EDR technology, I think, really changed that, right? Now let's protect the endpoint. We'll still have pretty high fences, but we know that folks will get over. And then we change from preventative to detection, and it really changed sort of how companies protect themselves. I'm going to ask you to at least repeat some of that question.
RMM.
RMM. So, RMM is just the idea of being able to deploy tools within your environment, right? So it's a remote management monitoring.
Tools.
Typically legit tools.
Not always. That's fair.
If the right people are using it, it's a legit tool. But actors now have really, because of EDR, I'll at least say partly because of EDR, what we've seen is there are legitimate tools that can be used by the actor. And so it gets harder and harder to detect those being used inside environments, because there's a lot of noise associated with it. When system administrators are doing what system administrators do from the second they come into work till when they leave, is running all of these kind of tools to do certain system admin. So what companies have done is they've removed all the logging associated with that. In some cases, they've even removed the security, right, the authentication to use those tools. And actors know that, right? So actors now can use legitimate binaries, legitimate tools that are found in all different, not just the operating system, but all kinds of third-party software. And now they use that to run their exploits. And we've created this term, living off the land binaries. That's really what's happening, and it's really changed the way you can defend. I've read a lot of articles about this, and they talk about EDR, how EDR is not enough to protect against this exact kind of tactic. I kind of disagree with that a little bit, because EDR sees all those legitimate binaries running. The question is are you logging them correctly, and what is your MDR solution? So are you monitoring your EDR tool in a way that you can see it? Because we'll take, and I always use the example of PS exec, which is just a legitimate binary, a legitimate tool that's used to execute something remotely. We know that system administrators use that all the time, but that doesn't mean that you should stop logging it. Because when someone is using that at 2 o'clock in the morning, it's probably not your system.
But the problem is fine log, but then is somebody watching and acting, and that's a problem. The other problem with EDR is you can have configuration issues, right? Yep. So if you're not configured correctly, and we have lots of clients who have faced this, where they felt like they were blocking RMM tools, AnyDesk, Zoho Assist, all that kind of stuff. They're blocking it or permitting one type of RMM. But then they realized that the rule wasn't configured appropriately, and the bad guy was able to download it in temp folders. Yep. So it's not as simple as this. Go ahead.
It's the configuration, it's the logging, and then it's the processes, right? Like, what are the company policies about using those tools, and how do they get used? And you do have to configure your EDR. You don't just load it and then A, nobody watches it, and B, no one configures it properly.
Can we go into the edge devices a little bit more on that too?
Go ahead, Kim and Jennifer.
We have entire ransomware groups that are focused on firewalls and VPN firewalls, edge devices, routers, state-sponsored actors, and that has actually been a shift in focus we've seen over the past 18 months. And you might think, well, it's easy, you should be able to patch, keep those up to date, but there are a series of CVEs for each of these firewalls coming out consistently. And Verizon's report on remediating critical vulnerabilities, they said 55 days is the average for 50% of the critical vulnerabilities out there. So you're a company, you purchase these devices, it's constant CVEs, you need to update. Sometimes they add notes to the sections that aren't part of the CVEs. Sometimes it's 0 days. So it's really hard for a company to stop the threat actor coming in, the financially motivated threat actor. I think it's a really important part too, because it's hard to investigate. You want to know what happened, and you look at the firewall device, and you're like, oh, it's updated. Well, maybe we had patched it, maybe we had good patch management, but that's because the threat actors now get in and update it after they exploit it, and they leave behind a back door. So they're doing all kinds of change in tactics. It's making it very, very difficult to keep them out from the edges.
You're not going to keep them out from the edges for sure. I mean, regardless of who the actor is.
But sometimes it's really simple how the threat actors get
Absolutely.
in there.
That was my point earlier. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
sometimes you dissect exactly what happened and you say, this is silly that this actually happened. So sometimes they have these evasive tactics. Other times they send a phishing email, get the credentials. We were talking about the law firms and Lunamoth earlier. You know, I had several law firms come to me where a Hulu subscription email was sent to somebody in the firm saying your subscription is going to increase by 23%. Number one, you shouldn't be using your work email as your Hulu subscription username. And number two, if the email says we're going to increase it and call this number, maybe do a little additional research before you call the number in the email and say, I can't pay this, I never use Hulu, I want to cancel. All right, let me remote into your system and change some of your settings, then you're good to go. A lot of times they're getting into the system via very simple measures, but then because of the edge, because of the lack of logging, because of the inappropriate tooling for MDR, because of lack of asset management. I can't even tell you how many times I get on the phone with a client and I say, I need to know the number of endpoints in your environment so that we can keep track of all of the devices having the EDR deployed. And they say, we don't have asset management program. We can't give you that number. Well, then you're never going to have confidence it's secure.
Right. No, 100%. I'm going to move to, we'll come back to APTs for a minute. Kim, you mentioned some APT groups. I mean, one of the things, again, we're seeing in our practice is a real increase in APT activity. You could attribute this, I guess, to multiple things. We're getting better in detecting them. They're making mistakes, or there's more activity, a combination of all these things. Ben, are you seeing an increase in the more sophisticated APT type group, and what are you seeing in terms of their tactics?
Yeah, so obviously when you think about APT, the first on the list or the highest on the list is China. And those particular, and listen, they go through, the names have changed, so let's forget about the names for a second. But they will get into a network and they don't mind not running anything, not doing anything to get caught for a very, very long time. It's been a while since the FBI days, but we would see actor groups specifically related to China go into a network and not do anything for 3 or 4 years. I mean, that is a tactic that they use. And we've seen this resurgence of these edge devices, right? Compromising the edge devices and then finding out that they had been there or they inserted code, a long time ago. And that is hard to defend.
Another
It's
area,
difficult.
another area I want folks to comment on is we have to, if we're given a survey of what we're seeing, the insider threat aspect. I think everybody's experienced that probably in this room, the IT worker scams of different flavors. Anyone want to comment on what we're seeing there?
Yeah, that it's very, very common. And so in most of our investigations of the worker scams, until you're given, the company is given.
Which a lot of that is state sponsored, by the way.
Yep,
I think everybody in the room knows. Go ahead.
And until a company has been given some indicators to look for, then they're like, oh, we should have known. We shipped a laptop to a different location of where their HR resources address is. But they otherwise are performing their IT job pretty good. They're showing up on the technology, on the calls. They're doing what they're expected 100%. So it's hard to know to look for it until you're given some indicators from either the government or otherwise.
But then once you have those indicators, again, it goes back to like sort of, and we are going to shift gears, and Jennifer, I'm going to come to you. I mean, and maybe I'm too critical. Well, no, I know I'm too critical, but again, this IT worker scam, I mean, when you see what has happened and how you see control after control failure, you see issues with third-party vendor management problems with that, and they're entirely preventable with better controls, management, oversight. So, governance. Want to talk about that, governance and risk management, and you can take it wherever you go. But what are you seeing in terms of how companies are thinking about or changing their risk management structure, the CISO structure in an organization?
So, well, the CISO structure, I think, is the point is, again, process, to have a defensible one that's thought out and got a rationale as to why it's got checks, balances, independence, pathways of communication, established, channels. So you can solve it in almost, as a personnel matter and in an infinite variety of ways very well. You just have to, sign up to solve the problem, where to put the CISO. I think with the 8K rule changes, I'm not sure they were rule changes, but rule, discussions and announcements from the SEC, there's been a lot more attention on what should the board be doing in governance and risk management. And I personally find it, just, from my chair, it's very helpful to have those new sections in the public company documents where someone has to articulate their governance and articulate their risk management. It's a very good occasion, to sort of say, hey, we got to get this, we got to get this right. So I thought I would say a little bit about, for the CISO, I think you can always look to what's the best, even if they can't achieve it in their program. And the frameworks have meaning apart from what you might think, do a framework, that's a risk control. But the frameworks like, NIST CSF 2.0, which, kind of maps into, say, in healthcare, recognized security practices and these, various places. If you really peg a program to that, if they really do it, these things that you're talking about around, the weak points will be pretty well managed. And as someone who handles the investigations and cleanup and litigation, as we all do, you're judged on how did you handle this risk relative to all risk. You're judged on this negligence or oversight relative to all the things you did accomplish. So if governance-wise, you come back to those sections of NIST CSF 2.0, you're not only on safe territory, like you can say that's what you did, but it's independently meaningful. And I will say I find even pretty sophisticated, large public companies can view those documentation exercises as, is it policies? It's a complete waste of time. We should put it off to the side, but it can be quite meaningful. And the reason it's in those, those domains and modules of the NIST, program is because they are very meaningful when you execute on them. So I like to, make a plug that they're actually useful. The second thing I wanted to talk about quickly is what's the role of the board in when there's an incident. I think it's a very hot topic. It's obviously going to be dependent on what's the size of the company. Is it a portfolio company? And it's private equity people on the board. They're practically managing it anyway. But in a public company context, all of incident response is a team sport. And I view the board as sitting, above, kind of above the team that's really, handling it. So they're going to make sure that the SEC reporting is handled very, very well because they've got audit committee and they've got people on the audit committee and they need to convene the expertise and get that going. They can be really, really helpful on resources of I'm on this other board, we use this firm, I think this is really perfect to this. So just making sure, you get the right people in the room. In terms of overseeing the incident response itself, I think that's where it can get kind of muddled. We were talking earlier that people say, well, our board needs to do a tabletop. I'm like, well, your board should have exposure to education and training and preparation and readiness, but I'm not sure they should be in there running scenarios because that won't be their job. They should rehearse what their job would be. So they, really the board can really help by demanding a regular cadence of meetings that have a very specific standard briefing structure, and that they make that whole IR team that we're often sitting in the middle of as a quarterback, but sometimes we might just be a spoke, not a hub. and make sure they're saying, first, where are we on financial exposure? Where are we on operational? What's the, deadline on that? Who are our key stakeholders? What's going on with our reputation and, qualification, and having, demanding the excellence and making the managers senior management do their job is a really important thing a board can do. And then the last thing, and I'll shut up, is so tempting when you get through the crisis to skip lessons learned. I can't think of anything more important for a public company than learning really big lessons on how to improve security from very small incidents. And so that's a rigor that the board can happen. Like, why is the CISO coming into the board with slides going, I blocked these immaterial things, and why are we talking about unimportant things? It's because if you do the root cause analysis, then you shore up your controls so that the big thing doesn't happen. And I think that's something that management shirks, wants to move on, and that's something really, really important for the board.
Well, Jennifer, on that point, I'm going to follow up with that on lessons learned. I think it's important because and Jennifer, I'll ask you, when you come in after IR and you're doing your root cause analysis, and there's the obvious how they get in, how they move around, and the detection and the alerting failures that inevitably happen in every single case. There's also the higher level, the management side of things and the governance side of things. And how are you advising your clients? And what are you looking for? How are you advising them in terms of, because it's obviously not the micro level of the alerting failures. There's something else typically going on. And how are you advising folks on that?
Yeah, it's important when you're going through the incident response process to look not only at the micro level, but the macro level, because there will be failures. And maybe it's a failure in micro reporting to macro. Maybe it's a failure in macro understanding their delegations of authority, some confusion around what they need to know, when they need to know it, what decisions, if any, they need to make. So we had talked about the tabletop. I have a client who brings the audit committee and the board to the tabletop. They're sitting in another room, they're doing work, then we bring them in and do a briefing as if we're trying to simulate a real life matter. And sometimes I get questions of, well, when did we last test our incident response plan? Great question, but I don't want to get that in the middle of an incident. So making sure we're not only doing the lessons learned, what went wrong here, but also a bigger picture discussion of everything that Jennifer was saying. These are the expectations. This is what you should be asking for. These are your responsibilities. And sometimes we don't have clients that ask for that discussion before you have an incident. It's after.
Ben, in terms of the CISO and their role, have you seen any changes in terms of where the CISO is being placed, who they report to? Some of the things I think we often see as practitioners in this space is sort of the fox guarding the hen house syndrome, and things not elevating up appropriately, or maybe the CISO doesn't have as much power and authority, doesn't win. Look, a CISO doesn't win every fight. There's no doubt about that. He's not going to get every dollar, or she's not going to get every dollar that she wants, but she needs to be in the room at the table. What are you seeing with where the CISO is?
Yeah, I mean, this is an age-old question of where the CISO sits. I think years past, the CISO usually reported to the CIO or director of IT, depending on the size of the company. And I think now there's been a push to try to elevate the CISO so they actually have a seat at the table. I'm of the opinion that the CISO should report to the CEO. I know you talk about generalities, like I agree, it's kind of something, it's not maybe appropriate for every single company, but
not every company has a CISO.
Not every, well, yeah,
that's another issue.
Yeah, and if it is your CFO, you're probably missing something. But the CISO should be a dedicated person, and they, in my opinion, should report to the CEO, because the questions or the approvals that are needed for the CISO to do their job should not be going to the director of IT and the CIO, and they should not be going to the CFO. It's the CEO that makes the decision, or should be making the decision, as to whether it's process, whether it's technology, whether it's outsourcing something. It needs to be at the highest level of the company, because the CEO, and maybe in conjunction with general counsel, their risk manager, can make that decision, and some may need to be brought to the board. The question is so important, right, that we really need to get board.
Well, let me ask a question about board, and Kim or Jennifer, either can answer this question. Are boards getting smarter? Are they doing better?
And I want to go back to what Jennifer said, which was fantastic.
I would say no.
Our
If
board,
anybody, my answer is no.
boards are getting more engaged. Boards' tones are changing. Boards are getting more frustrated. And in my opinion, this goes to the board oversight role and incident response. They've been hearing that they've been getting reports, getting quarterly reports now. Many companies get quarterly reports on the cybersecurity program. It all sounds good. They got good statistics and various things, and then they have a big breach. Wait, how can we have a big breach? And we just had these fantastic reports along the way. So the tone's changing, and what also is starting to happen is they're overstepping into management's role. When you have a big breach, well, wait, why aren't you hiring this partner? You hired these 3 partners, but we think you should hire this partner. Wait, it's day 2, we're going to commission, we're going to have an independent law firm come in and look at what happened here. We want to know what happened, why did this happen, how did this happen? We just heard for 3 or 4 years, a great program, it shouldn't have happened. So we're having a lot of friction in the incident response, and that goes back to, well, what should we do? Should we do these tabletops? How can we get them more informed so they're more comfortable about the process of when they're going to be notified, what the management has done to be comfortable with the process? They're not challenging that process in the midst of an incident, because we are seeing some of that overstep happen.
I think depending on say you had a major incident that left the current CISO not suited for the job, lost confidence, either the board or the CEOs lost confidence in them. It's an opportunity to do a surge of change. And so, in not every breach, but in very significant matters, we can say we've got some really trusted outside parties that can come in and really just help you make this program into what you would like it to be, going forward. And if you feel like a boot camp of like, what if for 60 days you had this surge of really expert thing that can sometimes mentor the people that you've got there. It's easier to operate a vehicle than it is to design and build, a vehicle. And so you can kind of get the program where it should be. And little tricks that they know, I think, like, there's a reason this person is the CEO of this company. They have many, many skills. They're obviously, bright and well suited. So you lean into their capabilities and create like a little cyber committee. So you have this embedded, really good, super, CISO, and they just get this cadence going of a cyber meeting. And if you do that for say 60 days, you have a completely different CEO on the topic of how to supervise, a CISO. Because what I don't like to see is moving people around on a chart. But they need competent oversight. They need experts. They need people that can talk to them about their problems and how they want to solve them and all of that. And so a little surge resource on the governance can be really, really helpful going forward. And they can really mentor them on, this is how you brief a board. This is what gets them engagement. And boards want to hear what the worst is, right? They don't want to find themselves in a major incident and feel like no one's been candid with them.
I can be just as critical on boards, or more so on the CISOs and the people reporting to the boards. I mean, boards are pretty good at understanding risks in their organizations. They're pretty darn good at that. They generally are terrible at understanding cyber risk. And I think a lot of that is because what are they being fed? What are they being educated? What are they being told the real risks are? How is that being obfuscated by management when those decks get presented up and they're like, oh no, this is too confusing. Let's stick with our bid site score because that's going to tell the board something, which, if I see one more bid site score or a security scorecard, as an indicator of what a risk is in an organization, it's absurd. But that's what boards are getting fed. Regulators, litigation. I want to talk about that for a minute. Jennifer, I'm going to ask you: are regulators onto this? Are they focused on governance? Are they focused on organizational technical controls? Where are the regulators? Where are you seeing them? After an incident, what kinds of stuff are you seeing?
Yeah, so I think it's a different lens looking at state regulators versus federal regulators. State regulators have become much more active than they have in years prior. And you've got the ones that you always hear from, that you've always heard from, but then you've got other states popping up asking questions about the timeline of the investigation, the extent of encryption within an environment, if we did deal with an encryption event, thought process around whether or not the ransom was going to be paid. And I'm not saying we answer all these questions, but we receive them. And sometimes it's after reporting to a state regulator that there were 2 residents within the state impacted. And then we get a nasty hand-slapping letter back, and we're like, it was 2 people, and we did just fine. But then on the federal level, we're seeing something completely different. And I think it's with the current administration. We have at the HHS level, we had one matter where it was $7 million. We were trying to negotiate a settlement with them. And the investigator called us and said, my last day is next Friday. Give me your last, best, final offer. And we went back to the client and we said, how do you want to handle this? Because you can try and negotiate, maybe get a really low settlement at this point. You have the option of seeing if it'll go away when this person goes away. And the client ultimately said, you know what, I don't think we're going to meet somewhere with this investigator anyway. Let's just kind of put our heads in the sand and see what happens. A few weeks later, that person's supervisor picks it up and says, I'm not interested in what you discussed with my underling who's no longer with me. We're back at $7 million. But my client is saying, well, let's see how long this guy lasts, because maybe he'll go away. So we're taking different approaches with different clients, but then we're seeing other closures of investigations that they should be asking more questions. They should be talking some dollars with our clients, and they're not. So it's very confusing. FTC, very little from them as well. So the federal level, we're seeing more drastic changes on the state level that can sometimes be favorable for our clients.
And how about you, Kim? Are you seeing where are you seeing the regulators? Is part of the problem that we're not getting there isn't enough risk for companies on regulatory investigations or litigation? I mean, consumer class actions are still being filed all the time, but what are you seeing from a regulatory?
Well, I look at the enforcement actions, and over time, especially the last 12 to 18 months, the enforcement actions are having more and more prescriptive controls that we wouldn't necessarily consider our industry standard or even necessarily reasonable, but we're sort of stuck with them. And, you know, I can give a couple of examples like phishing resistant MFA. It's not good enough now that you have MFA in place, but you have to have phishing resistance, which is a whole different technology. Asset management, software, hardware, asset management, end of life management cycle being built into the enforcement actions, which is, you know, much more complex and much more challenging, difficult than just regular asset management, if you want to call it that. Logging, monitoring, all activity on systems, you know, just really broad generalizations in these enforcement actions that call into question what, you know, the general applicability outside of that company, but something you have to be mindful of.
I was just going to say that, you know, people who do so much diligence, being a large, with a large corporate presence, and people want to know what's the worst that could happen, and they're always thinking in terms of fines, penalties, and damages. And I'm like, no, it's what Kim said. It's the fact that these controls are going to be, you know, hard-coded at risk of contempt for, 20 years, perpetuity, you know, whatever, you know, that is. These are very expensive, you know, changes, and maybe they're healthy in a way. I mean, sometimes I say, like, you might find if you do this security program that it's great for your company. It's not, you know, you can find the budget and you know, get it done. But to me, that's the name of the game in regulatory investigation. The, you know, HHS, the fines, like, you don't want to pay a fine. It's got a reputational, you know, hit on it. But the dollar figures are generally class actions too, affordable. You know, it's the more consequential thing is what they're going to demand that you, you know, impose by way of security program.
And I think that gets back to the CISO and what they're doing in the approval to spend money and what they're reporting up, because that is exposure that the board should be aware of, the potential contempt when you have this, like you said, hard-coded. And I don't think that information flow channel is the way that it should be.
Yeah. How about SEC focus? We saw this past year, you know, the first exemption or national security delay granted, 2 extensions there. How are you counseling clients on disclosure obligations, filing an 8K? We saw the SEC come out and say, you know, guys, chill out a little bit. I mean, I think people, you know, went a little bit hard and fast there. How are you counseling folks, Kim, Jennifer?
Well, I think it's interesting that we have seen sort of full cycle back since the May 2024 CorpFin guidance of, hey, if it's not material, don't put it in the 801, right? And so we're seeing more, or don't put it in the 105. We're seeing, again, reverting back, sort of put it in the 801 as in the other events, as if it's if it's not material, it should go there, but that still is supposed to be a material event. So, I think we're seeing more days, at least the length of time increase between the security event happening and when the filing occurs. So there's not as much of the knee-jerk reaction. It's got to happen within 4 days, even if we don't know. So I don't think our counsel is changing. We need to be identified and have a good process and understand all the different considerations, determinations, the qualitative, the quantitative, and evaluate whether it's material. If you look back at the past couple of events filed under 105, it is interesting how they still say, potentially could be material, right? And you occasionally say likely to be material, but it's rarely we've determined this to be material. Jennifer, you probably have some more information on that.
Yeah, and I think, again, process is, cyber counsel can't write that, and public company counsel can't write that. They have to have a fusion, and write it, together. And, each one of those sections in an AK or in any public filing has deep experience from accounting, from a million things that have nothing, toxic torts, a million things that have nothing to do with us, and you need to be infused with that. So a lot of the chaos that we see in the reporting, we think somehow the public company counsel couldn't get fluent enough in cyber to really weigh in intelligibly, and then the cyber counsel couldn't get, and so they're kind of copying what other people did, but there's certainly a good amount of mediocrity and what people come up with.
Thanks to the panel. One last question. I know we're out of time, but real quick, I want to go down the line. Is AI making things better or worse for the good guys? Kim, better or worse?
Better for the good guys.
Ben?
More complicated.
Jennifer?
Mixed bag.
What?
Mixed bag.
And Jennifer?
I was going to say what Kim said. I was optimistic. Like, I thought it was, there was a lot of opportunity there.
Well, if anybody wants to guess what I'm
do
going
you
to
think?
say.
You're saying
Worse.
Worse.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.